Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Capitalist LinkedIn Live. My name is Amit, and today I'm joined by Harshal Shah, who is the founder of the Venture Build. And we have a pretty interesting topic about going across the borders and scaling businesses globally. And I think I have a perfect guest for today's conversation. So Harshal, thanks for joining me, and good to have you online here with us on LinkedIn.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Amit. Pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, and I know we're going to be chatting in the background just before this, and I know you've done a few things in your life and career, so I don't think it would do it justice if I give you a bit of an intro, but I would love to sort of get to know a little bit about you and your story, and ultimately we'll talk about the Venture Build and the business you're currently working on. But anything you think the audience would love to know about you in the context of this conversation? We'll love to.
Absolutely. I'll be happy to, Amit. I mean, it's a fun ride, I would say, right? I mean, it started off quite well. It's been close to 25 plus years now. Like, started off like a lot of us as a tech nerd, did a bunch of really techie things that we love to. Got in entrepreneurship, and entrepreneurship started changing a lot of things, right? So you get to this whole realization, right, that technology is good, right? But it's like 10-20% of the overall scheme of things, right? And so you start learning a lot more. As part of entrepreneurship, that changed a huge amount of perspective. Fortunately, unfortunately, went back to corporate, started managing P&Ls, sub P&Ls for healthcare and life sciences, product engineering services, and private equity for a technology services company, close to $1 billion in revenues, right? So seen some very interesting things as part of working with the CXOs in different domains, right? And that actually gives you a very interesting perspective of the kind of things and the lens at which CXOs would start looking at things, right? Came to the US 2012, have been in the US since then. Again, a huge change, right, from what you start seeing, right? I've lived in Europe, I've lived in Asia, and then you start looking at living in the US, right? You start seeing all the different perspectives, right, both from people, culture, and things that will start coming up, right? So all of that gave me some very interesting perspectives in life. When I was managing private equity relationships, right, I figured that there is a gap. So if you look at a typical private equity would do invest, optimize, and grow. That is how I'll actually do a 30,000 feet zooming, right, from a private equity perspective, right? So they'll identify the right companies who would have a lot more potential, invest into that, start figuring out the operational optimization piece for that, right, and get that 3x or 4x of EBITDA. Go ahead and start getting in the growth phase, either getting more acquisition, IPO, or others. And what I figured was companies which are not private equity ready, typically venture-backed companies, right, they lack that operating ecosystem to be able to help them scale, right? And that's where the Venture Build was born, right? So the whole idea of Venture Build is how do you help scale venture-backed companies to the next level, right? So that's the genesis of the Venture Build.
Yeah, that makes sense. And obviously, it's an interesting place and getting exposure to different markets, like from the personal perspective, is quite enriching because you get to learn a lot.
Yes.
And in the context of business, there's always opportunities elsewhere, but obviously, it's not as straightforward as it like to be. So getting health and building your business is probably quite important. But I kind of want to ask you to spend maybe a little bit of time reflecting, I guess, on your experiences and every knowledge you've gained over the years. So when you kind of work with a business or advise businesses, like what are some of the key challenges you feel they face, not only as they grow in terms of maturity, but as they grow kind of beyond their home markets, as they go across borders? What are some of the things that people do need to keep in mind, and maybe something that catches them off guard?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Amit. I think overall what I've seen is, and again, I think we've seen this all around, right? Even outside of business, when you move from one geography to another, right, there are challenges with respect to just making sure that you're aligned to the right things. Businesses have pretty much the same thing, right, but to a different level, right? Because now that is tied directly to your dollar value, So if I were to start summarizing, right, some very key challenges, people, culture are on the top of the list, right? That essentially, right, every geography is different, every relationship is different, right? So some of the things that you might have done in Singapore, for example, right, might
Yeah.
not be the right way to structure it here in the US, for example, right? I mean, so I'll give you an example. I had a very interesting company based out of Europe that scaled significantly. They got to 10 million plus in revenue. This was in the healthcare space. And if you start looking at the UK healthcare space, right, it's a single payer healthcare ecosystem. NHS would actually just govern everything, right? Now, vis-a-vis when you come to the US, right, the healthcare system is completely different. Right now, the same startup or the same scale up, right? Could they succeed in the US? The answer is yes. But the product go to market could actually be completely different because now you're dealing with multi-payer health systems, right? So those are some of the challenges, right, in terms of how do you define the right go to market for that geo? How do you define the right product go to market for that, right? And just because you've scaled in one location does not mean that you would actually apply the same math and start growing here, right? So those are some of the things that I see a lot of startups struggling with, right? And just having that local know-how, right, in terms of being able to start understanding some of the local nuances, right, and then identifying the right partners for scale in that geo, right, is very, very, very pivotal, right? For example, I mean, if you go and build your business here in the US, I mean, you're going back to China, right? It's a completely different ecosystem, right? And there could be different ways by which people are doing business, right? Japan is a lot more trust-based business, right? And so there are a lot of different parameters, right? When you start looking at some
Yeah.
of these things, and knowing that, right, is the key to success, right, in terms of growth. And typically, when you're a scale-up, right, you have both kind of challenges, right? You don't have the luxury to spend hundreds of billions of dollars, right, in terms of market research and getting that, right? At the
Yeah.
same time, you really want to actually start adding value to that, to scaling your business in new geo, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I completely agree with some of the points you've made. And, reflecting on Capita's journey over the last couple of years, we've kind of been going
Yes.
through that ourselves, right? So, you can think about, based in Singapore, Southeast Asia as a whole market, but even within that region, when you look at the top 6 economies, they're all very different, right? So the way people speak, negotiate, communicate, write emails or WhatsApp, as it's a bit more popular in some countries. It's very different. You have to adjust, you have to relearn, and you can't use the same messaging, which I think is the fun part, right? Because when you go to the new market, it's gonna have to start from scratch, right? And I guess that's the exciting and part that can help you unlock more opportunities. But with that in mind, so I think that kind of makes sense, and I would imagine the audience, anyone tuning in or watching this later would agree. But how do you go about helping other businesses, right? So I'd kind of love to understand from the venture build perspective. I guess what is the offering, and do you assist companies scaling in, for example, in the US or North American markets? And if so, like what is kind of generally your approach? Where do you start, right? Because there's so many different avenues, like which channel do you use? How do we build a team? Like, what's kind of your general thought process on the offering that you have for your partners and customers?
Great. So I think it's been a very interesting learning process, Amit. Just so that I mean, we started off the venture build 2 years ago, and then since then we've actually helped quite a few businesses, right, in terms of scaling, and we've started learning as part of the process as well, right? But one of the key things that I've seen, and that's why we structured this new program called the Growth Scale Program, which is very recent launch that we started doing, right? The idea is, what we figured was you need a trusted ally to really handhold you, right, in the beginning. And these guy, whoever that partner is, right, needs to be seasoned, who understands the nuances of the business, at the same time who understands the geography in the right way. Right? Now, it's a very difficult thing, as I said, for a scale-up business to have access to some of these talents. And that's where what we have created is this whole pool of business advisors. These are people who have 35 plus years of experience. They've actually been CXOs or very successful entrepreneurs in the past, and now they're either trying to help their community in a consulting gig, right? They're not interested in the corporate world, right? They're actually doing that, right, as part of the overall thing. So we curated this list of very successful people and who would start coming in, right, and acting as your trusted allies, right, and you start navigating this journey. There are a lot of these venture studio programs and stuff like that, right? But the core problem with some of these is, right, I mean, not many of them are focused on real execution, right? So how do you really help them? So what is the biggest thing that typically a business need is how do you brand yourself? How do you actually reach out to your customers? How do you create your right partners, right? So what we have done at the Venture Build is focused on those pieces, right? Which is really making where really the bang for the buck, right? So how do you actually help, right, these companies get to the right customers, get to the right partners, right, in this geography, right? So two or three things that we started a managed partner service program, right? So essentially end-to-end managed partnerships, right? And I think you know this very well, Amit, right? That channel partnerships consist of close to about 65 to 70% of the overall sales channels, right? So how do you actually streamline manage channel partnership programs, right? So we've worked with a platform that we've integrated as part of the Venture Build, right? And these scale-ups would get access to the managed channel partnership program end to end. The second thing we started off is created a reseller marketplace, right? What that means is if you want to actually start scaling, right? I mean, you might have a point solution, right? And there's somebody else who you can collaborate with and start building a bigger solution, right? So this reseller marketplace allows you to start having the local market channel ecosystems, right, to help scale. Right? So the combination of trusted allies, seasoned execs who help you guide, right, the managed partnership programs, the reseller support system. These are the core pieces, right, which actually helps you scale from a top line revenue perspective, right? This combined with the support ecosystem, right? So you need help with services, you need help with recruitment, you need help with accounting, legal. I think we've partnered very well as well with Capita, right, on the ESOP valuation and revenue side, right, in terms of doing that, right? So we have that partnership as well going on with, as you very well aware of, right? So some of these partnership bouquet, right, allows you to start actually having a single point, right, where you can just become that small POC for these scale-ups to start helping them scale.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the important notion here is that it's hard to do things alone, no matter what stage you are. When you're getting started, you might need mentors, you need help, you need friends, right? And I think you continuously need friends no matter what stage of growth you are, and especially when you enter new markets. But I think like an interesting aspect about North America or focusing on the US specifically, the US is not one market. There's so many different hubs, and I know you're based in Austin in Texas, right?
Yes.
And obviously it's been a lot in the news with companies shifting in their headquarters and other things going on, and there's always a bit of a competition between different startup hubs. So how do companies even navigate it? So when companies want to enter, for example, the US market, the whole like federal structure is confusing, and you don't know where to look, where to start. So
yes,
what are the important things to consider? Like if, for example, someone wants to expand in the US, wants to set up shop, they register in Delaware, do they go somewhere else? How does it work? So what are some of the things to keep in mind from the, I guess, state to state perspective? Because I think that's something that some people don't necessarily think about, because they think of it as like one big homogeneous market, but that's not really the case, is it?
That's right. So it's, and you've seen this much more, Amit, right? So you know this, but a lot of people don't realize that. So when you talk about US, as you rightly pointed out, right, this is not one country. This is 50 different countries operating under one federal structure. I mean, it's literally like that, right? And every state had their own ways of doing business. Every state has their own incentive schemes. Every state their own priorities, right? I mean, Texas, some very phenomenal things that Texas is good at, right? Even within Texas, right, Houston is like a big oil and gas belt, as you already know. Dallas is like a huge financial services belt. Austin is coming out some huge tech services belt now, taking over some big players. I remember we were talking about this just before this chat, right? There are a lot of bigger players Tesla, Meta, and others are moving here, right? And so so each and every state is different, right? Knowing which is your domain, what is your scale up, right? Which is the core domain focus area. Now, do you have incentives in each state, right? Do you have incentive in this state versus this state? Is very critical, right? I mean, Detroit, Michigan, right? It's a very big auto market right now. If you are in an automotive industry, right, where do you actually start placing your scale up, right? When you start moving to the US, right? Knowing and having that know-how is very critical for business. And when I say very critical, I mean, there are incentive programs where you might get some huge incentives, which might actually just allow you to start scaling up your opportunity in the US in a much easier way rather than starting somewhere else, right? I mean, now people don't realize there are states like North Dakota. I mean, there are people who might not think of or thought of states like North Dakota and South Dakota, right? There are some very interesting programs out there. Okay, so it's actually very useful to have, as when I was talking about this before, right? The local knowledge, right, and having somebody who understands some of these landscapes, right, to be able to start guiding you, right, as to what works where and why, right, can actually become make or break for your entry in the US, right? So some of these states, right, and some of these states have very useful business-friendly policies for scale-ups. So identifying and knowing this, right, is extremely useful, right, when people will start doing that, right? So I would encourage all of your audiences, right, to do their own due diligence and research and identify somebody local. If they were actually starting to look at that, right, it is always a good idea to start having that thing in the mind, right? And you talked about Delaware, right? So Delaware has actually become very famous, right, in terms of registrations. I mean, pretty much a huge amount of LLCs are incorporated in Delaware. Not many people know that there are a couple of states which are actually as competitive or even better competitive now, right, than Delaware. But you might not be aware of because, 10 different friends of mine are incorporating in Delaware. I go do the same, right? So that's the typical attitude, right? And that can sometimes actually start giving you, right, a lot more loss in productivity and allows you to start actually helping, right, in terms of being able to start scaling if you do the right thing.
Yeah, no, for sure. And that's definitely something, we're seeing as well, right? Yeah, Delaware is definitely there, but, Nevada is like doing a little bit more to attract more startups there, and obviously other spots as well. Obviously not associated as maybe with incorporation and building businesses, but that's the reality. I want to pick on something you mentioned in your answer earlier. So I think you used the term a trusted ally a couple of times, right? And I think no one would disagree it's important to establish that support network through channel partners, advisors, consultants, anyone else you can work with. But what about kind of building the team? Because ultimately, at some stage, it's always important to have your own employees on the ground. So, what's your general advice for the businesses you work with in terms of setting up their initial core team in the location once they pick what it is? How should they go about it?
Yeah. So let me put it this way: an employee works for the company. The trusted ally works for the success of the company. Right? That's the core difference. Right? Now, you got to have employees. There is no doubt to that, right? I mean, these guys that I'm talking about as trusted allies, right, in that bigger bucket, right, are not going to run the company for you. They're going to be the flashlight, right, or the lighthouse, right, who would actually go ahead and guide you to the entry barriers, right, on the new geography, right? You would eventually need employees, right? But a lot of times people don't realize, right, that if you just actually hire an employee without having a lot, I mean, and this trusted ally, I mean, maybe somebody could be somebody like a TVB who could be a partner in helping, right? It could be your local advisor that you might have known, right? I mean, you might have actually worked. So I know people who have studied here, right? I mean, somebody who is local to you, right? Who has understand that geography. That individual could be your trusted ally, right? So the trusted ally could be anybody, right? That you think would actually help you, right? In terms of whose focus is the success of the company, right? And that is very important, right? Once you have that, right? Then with the help of this person, right, then you can go ahead and start navigating and identifying the right employees, the right structure, what works, what doesn't work, and then start doing that, right? And I've seen scale-ups making this mistake, right, where again, there was one of the other example. This company came back, right, and said, yeah, I mean, we've grown now 20 million. We want to start scaling in the US. We already have a budget for 2-3 sales guys here, so we're going to go and hire them, right? That's great, right? But imagine, right, the sales guy, right, having no knowledge of how this is going to work here locally, right, might end up not being successful for himself and for the company, right? And so, how do you actually balance that out is very useful, and that's something that people, and when they start realizing that, the sooner they start realizing that, that helps them, right, in terms of, and this is true for any job. It is not true for North America. It's true for anybody, right? I mean, when you go and settle in Singapore, right? I mean, I have no idea how Singapore works, right? So essentially, unless and until, right, you have somebody local there who give you that insights, right? That is going to actually allow you to start settling down in a lot more easier way than otherwise.
And the way I look at it seems through. But I guess the other thing you've kind of mentioned, I want to pick on that and kind of link it to kind of what we do day to day, sort of at Capita, right? It's make sure people are on the same page and aligned in terms of their interest, right? So it's kind of working for the business and working for the success. I like what you mentioned there.
Yeah.
Right. And that kind of brings me to the topic obviously close to our heart is like, creating right incentives for the team, for consultants, advisors, right? And compensation or structuring that arrangements plays a very important role, because whenever you enter a new market, you want to ensure that the goals of business are clear and all stakeholders, whether it's internal, external, are aligned with that. So I'd love to kind of pick your brain on this. Are there any structures you've kind of seen work, or how do you think about incentives and maybe compensation or structuring the team? Any kind of like maybe case studies or something like that in your days you've seen like, oh, that quite worked well, that's why the business was successful?
Yeah. So no, I mean, let me tell you this by saying, Amit, I've been very impressed with Capita, right, and that entire leadership. I've met their management, right, multiple times, and you guys are doing some amazing work, right, in terms of being able to start helping a lot of these startups and scale up, right, on this very important topic, right. I mean, it is, when you are at the early stage, right, having some of these things are extremely useful, right? So what I have seen is, and one, you're constrained by the cash component, but at the same time, right, it is extremely useful to have your early employees have skin in the game, right? And having the right ESOP/equity structure, right, depending upon where you are, is critically important, right? Unless and until you structure it right, right? I mean, that allows people, and I've seen a lot of these. I've seen a lot of my peers, right, being extremely successful just because of the fact that they were in some of these scale-ups, right, at the right time, right, and then these ESOPs or these equity structures that they were part of, right, gave them that boost, right, where they could actually start scaling up. So that's very, very key, right? Now, I think you know this much better, right? That there are different forms and different ways of structuring either ESOPs or equity based on who you are hiring, right? At what stage, whether that's an advisor or an employee, and even the employee, right? What stage, right? There are different forms of ESOPs and equity, right? That you can start offering, and having the right knowledge of this is also equally important for a founder, right? A lot of times, right? People don't realize, right, that there are different forms of ESOPs. There are RSUs, there are normal ESOPs, there are equity structure, there is levels, right, within the ESOP structure as well, right? And so understanding some of these, right, actually sometimes could be make or break, because if you start giving a lot more voting rights to some of the employees who might not be relevant, right, that might backfire on you, and you might just stop your entire scheme. So understanding some of these things are critically important, right, when you're starting doing that, right? So having somebody, again, as a right partner to be able to start working with you, right, allows you to start helping you in the right way. And as far as I know, I mean, essentially, I think Kavita is doing a great job, right, in saying that, okay, if you are a startup below at a certain stage, right, we'll just go ahead and offer a lot of these services at a highly discounted price and free for sometimes, right? And so that allows people to start actually using that, right, at the right time and helping them scale.
No, for sure. Look, Harshal, I think we can keep going forever, but I want to wrap things up here. But before I do that, I kind of want to point out a few things you mentioned today, which I think are pretty important takeaways and some lessons that I've gained from this conversation. But I like how you talked about identifying those trusted allies, and they could be anyone, internal, external individuals, companies. I think it's very important. The other key takeaway for me is doing your research and doing the homework. So no matter what you venture into new markets, it's definitely something you need to be mindful of as well. But there's definitely plenty of advice, plenty of help you can get from those around you. And I think the third one is about kind of getting that local knowledge and not essentially following the conventional wisdom of everyone else just because everyone else is doing something. There may be a better way to do it. And especially in the market like the US, there's definitely a lot of opportunities. Some that are not as explored as others, which can be a bit of a challenge initially, but can really pay off for you if you set things up right in your business and set it up for success. So those kind of 3 points that really stuck with me. But so I do appreciate you kind of sharing your insights and a little bit about your journey. If there's anyone in the audience has more questions, wants to reach out to you, what would be the best way for them to find you? Is it email, LinkedIn, or any other forms of communication they prefer?
Yep. So I'm available both. I mean, I'm pretty much fairly available on LinkedIn. Email is Harshal, which is my first name, at theventurebuild.com. You can also reach out to 3VB at hello@theventurebuild.com, right? But the team and I would be extremely ready, right, in terms of helping wherever there is a need.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Harshal. That was a great conversation. It was always good chatting with you. So I appreciate you finding some time so we can move on to better and bigger things. But on that note, also want to thank everyone in the audience and everyone checking out this recording on LinkedIn in days to come for tuning in and checking this out. That was another edition of Capita's LinkedIn Live, where we cover various topics helping businesses go across borders and finding success. With that in mind, keep an eye on future sessions that we're going to be scheduling in the next couple of weeks, and we'll see you there. But thanks again.
Thanks, Amit. Thanks for having me.
Cheers.